To do is to talk to you about the jars. This is a 125 mil, this is a 250 mil, and this is a 500 mil. The 500 mil is our most popular jar, and we have two different sizes. This is the decorative, and then we have the ones with the shoulders, which this is the one with the shoulders. Okay, that's what we call the shoulder, right? And this is the most popular jar. But one of the things that I always tell people to do is when you first buy your jars, always inspect the jar, all right? Always inspect the rim of the jar, make sure it's free of nicks or cracks. Because it's glass, it's transported through a long distance, it can crack, okay? If there's any cracks on there, do not use it. Get rid of it, put it in recycling, or use it for something else, but do not use it for canning. Because this is plastisol, okay? And that's what's going to create your vacuum seal on that thing. So if there's any food particles or any dust or anything on there, this may not seal, okay? This is your screw band, this is your sealing disc. Sealing disc may only be used once. Once it's used, it needs to be discarded. Totally recyclable. These things can be reused. Once this is attached to that, and this is there, you don't need to use this anymore. This can come off and can be set aside, okay? And this can stay like that. I know it's more pleasing to the eye to have the screw band on, but once this is sealed, this does not need to be on there. Because if you keep this in a cool, damp place, it is metal, it will rust, all right? Because you're plunging in boiling water, out of boiling water. So what I tell people is to remove it, make sure it's free of any food particles and water, excuse me, and keep it in a dry place to reuse. These things can last several years, okay? We used to tell people to boil these lids, right? I love this little tool, that's what people get. So what happened was we discovered that when you're boiling these lids, they were scratching up against each other. And if this is scratched in any way, you're going to compromise the seal, okay? So what we tell people is just bring it up to a boil, shut the heat off, and let it sit in the boiling water until you're ready to use. If you don't use them for your canning, because I always put 1 or 2 extra in there because, you know, sometimes jams give you 1 or extra. So I always put a couple of extra in there. If you don't use them, wipe them clean, and you can use them for the next time, all right? So that's not a problem. What I do in the beginning is I wash my jars. Now some people ask me if you can use a dishwasher to sanitize your jars. Yes, you can use your dishwasher to sanitize your jars. However, that being said, once you take your jar out of your dishwasher, your jar is no longer sterile, okay? So, and what I mean by sterile is, by keeping them in boiling water, your jars are always sterile. There are 2 reasons why we heat process. So, and I'll get to that in a minute. So what I do is I clean my jars, put them in the canner. I have a rack on the bottom, okay? Put my jars in there, and I put it on high, and I get my things going. This can boil as long as it takes, okay? I would suggest not to let the water run out because you'll have yourself a little mess, but don't worry about it. Just put it on high, start your prep, get everything started, and then go back to that. Yeah. As long as the glass doesn't hit the bottom of the pot so it doesn't rattle, it's fine, okay? And it's a very simple rack. It's a rack that you can buy anywhere, okay? There are 2 reasons why we heat process, okay? 1, to eliminate any bacteria or potential mold that goes into the product. Secondly, the reason why we heat process is to create a vacuum seal. Now, when we do our jams, jellies, chutneys, pickles, and all that stuff, the environment we breathe has bacteria and mold, and our bodies are accustomed to it, all right? So when you take the jar out of the boiling water, we are no longer in a sterile environment. The jar is no longer sterile. When you remove your boiling items, it's no longer sterile, okay? So you put that in a jar, and many people skip this step. So this is why I want to say it's very important. They put their products in the jar, all right, and they set it down, and they do not heat process. The reason why we tell people to heat process, the second reason is to eliminate any bacteria or mold that's in there, and to create a vacuum seal. Now, every time that I've used a heat processing method of water, my things always seal, and I don't have to wait 3 hours to hear that pop, right? They seal almost immediately, take them out of the boiling water. Now, if people skip this step, you still will get a seal. However, it can seal and then it can become unsealed, because if you don't have a good vacuum seal, it can come undone, all right? Now, this is a space gauge, okay? For every Bernardin recipe, it'll tell you what the head space should be, all right? This is a 1/4 inch, all right? that's a 1/2 inch, that's 3/4 inch, and that's 1 inch. Every Bernardin recipe will tell you what the headspace should be, all right? So jams and jellies is a 1/4 inch, so when you put your items there, it's your first notch. The food should touch that only. So when you put that in, okay, and I'll show you in a minute. And I always work on a protected surface, okay? Always on a cloth. If you have granite or concrete or any type of hard surface, keep in mind that you're taking a boiling jar out of the counter, and I always work on something because if you set it down on this, the bottom might pop out, okay, or crack. So I always work on a protected surface just to make sure, all right? Everything is clean, right, at this stage, but because our environment is not sterile, the reason why we heat process is because by putting it in the boiling water for a specific amount of time, it's going to eliminate all the bacteria or mold and keep it sterile. Okay? Always make sure to wipe the top of the jar, okay? Because again, if anything gets on top of there, and if you put your sealing disc, it may not seal, okay? So we put this little baby on. Center it nicely like that. And then fingertip tight, all right? Fingertip tight. The reason why we only do it fingertip tight, some people have a tendency to really put it tight. Big no-no, because what you're doing is we're trying to create a vacuum seal with this. So when you're boiling this and you remove it from the boiling water, the atmospheric pressure is going to push out the air that's in there and then seal the sealing disc. If this is on too tight, the air that's in there, it's got to go somewhere. So it's going to make this buckle or make the bottom of the jar pop out. Most likely, these are going to buckle. The jar should be covered with at least 1 inch of water when canning. So they need to be covered with.
The full ones?
Yep. Yep. With 1 inch of water. Well, if you put less in, it's a little more dangerous because it's trying to create a vacuum seal and push that air out. If you have a lot of air in there, it's trying to push that air out and it may not seal. All right. Now, if there's too much of the stuff in here, because there's no vacuum seal, the stuff is going to push out and it's going to touch the seal, and it's going to leak, and then you may not get a seal. So it's kind of important to always address the headspace. And again, all of our recipes and all the trusted, reliable source for recipes has headspace. Just because you don't hear the pop doesn't mean it hasn't sealed. A couple of hours later, let it cool down and just touch the center. If this doesn't bounce back, I want it to make a noise. See, this is bouncing back. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
That's not sealed, right? This is not bouncing back, it's sealed. Surdo, which I worked for several years while I was working for Kraft, they tell people to sterilize their jars in the oven. The big no-no. I'll tell you why. The reason why is because dry heat in the oven. Everybody see the oven? All right. In the oven, you have a hot spot and a cool spot. Okay. When you put your jars in the oven, all right. If you have this full of jars, the center spot may be hotter than the other spot, and the outdoor spot may be hotter, and the inner spot may be hotter. So it's not distributing the heat evenly in your jar, and when you put something in your jar, it can explode. Just make sure that you're following the recipe and heat process, heat process, heat process.